In 91 days, we all get to decide if the guy who's currently in charge of how we're responding to this epidemic should stay in the job for 4 more years, or if Democratic candidate Joe Biden would do better at this. It's honestly hard to know what it will be like for a president to stand for re-election with 200,000 dead Americans as a key metric from his first term while he asks for a second term. But we're going to talk tonight about how some of that is going to work and some of what we can see coming down the pike. And a lot of it is very worrying in terms of the institutions of our democracy and what we count on to keep us a constitutional republic. We're going to be talking tonight, for example, about what appears to be one sort of shocking sign that the White House doesn't expect President Trump to be here for a second term. Back in April, the administration went to Congress and told them that because of COVID, they were going to need some more time to get the census done. Instead of basically finishing up the census and turning in the results of it by the end of this year, they wanted a few months extension, an extension into next spring to be able to get the thing done and compiled. And it honestly makes sense. The census is a huge undertaking, right? You're trying to count over 300 million people. It involves huge numbers of people doing tons of shoe leather work. And lots of its offices were closed for months because of the pandemic. So it makes sense that they would need some extra time to finish it up. The associate director for the 2020 census recently did a briefing where he said there was definitely not enough time for the Census Bureau to get this thing done properly on the original schedule, unavoidably because of COVID. And so, yeah, they needed the extension. But now a sudden about-face, a sudden U-turn from the Trump administration, because I think they just realized what that means if they're going to take that extension that they asked for. The administration has suddenly just announced that they're not only going to not take that extra time they asked for, they're actually going to wrap up the whole census thing early. They're going to stop the count a month early. They're going to stop the count altogether, actually, next month, which on its surface is a little bizarre, right? I mean, they've already said they're crunched. They're not going to get this done without extra time to complete it because of the pandemic. As Vanita Gupta points out, she was just on with Chris Hayes tonight here on MSNBC. She was the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department in the Obama administration. She points out that the census is calling it quits early, even as their response rate right now is the lowest it's ever been. At this point in the process, they have counted fewer of us than ever before at this point in the process. And so why would they cut off the counting early? They would not only need that extension, they would need to scale up what they're planning on doing. So why would they be cutting it back? Right? On the surface, it makes no sense. If you actually want to count everyone in the country, you need the extra time, and they should not only be taking the extension, they certainly shouldn't be stopping work early. I mean, the census is supposed to count everyone in the country. If that's what you want to do, what the Trump administration is doing right now makes no sense. If, however, they're not really interested in counting the whole country, and if specifically they're not interested in counting the people who are hardest to count, poor people, minorities, marginalized populations, people who move a lot, people who are in homeless shelters, people who are hard to find, if the Trump administration doesn't really want to count those people, because maybe they don't want those people to be counted. They don't want, for example, all the consequences of those people being counted, which include federal funding for places where those people live, right? Getting congressional seats apportioned to places where those people live. If, for example, you'd be happier with those people never getting counted at all, well, then cutting off the count early will conveniently cut out the people who get counted last, the people who are hardest to count, hardest to find, people who are hardest to lock down in terms of getting a census response. But in terms of this decision being made late by the Trump administration, I think they've also realized that by wrapping this thing up early, right, rather than taking the extension that they were going to, by wrapping this thing up early, that also means they're going to be handing over the census data to the president who's in office this term, not the one who will be in office next spring. Under the deadline they had previously asked Congress for, they'd be handing over the data to the White House in the spring, which happens to be after the next inauguration. Now, by walking away from that plan, which they themselves said they needed because of COVID, now the data will be sent to the president by the end of this year, not next spring when Joe Biden very well could be in the Oval Office. As Vanita Gupta puts it in her Washington Post op-ed today, quote, in the event that President Trump does not serve a second term, cutting the census short would ensure that that decisions about congressional apportionment are made under his presidency, not the Biden presidency that may be in effect by next spring. So, I mean, what this looks like is that the White House thinks President Trump is going to lose, or at least they're hedging their bets. And that means cutting the census short from even what they said they needed, thus making sure that it's Trump who will get the census data before Biden is sworn in January. So it'll be Trump who can proclaim, census looks good to me. And he can proclaim who's been counted where and which states get additional congressional seats and which states lose them based on who was counted and who was left out. I mean, it was the Trump administration itself that said they couldn't get it done in time. Now they're like, screw it, let's not get it done in time, and let's get this thing sealed and done before Biden gets here. At least Republicans can grab extra seats in Congress that way, from a deliberately bad count. That seems fair. Let's do it that way.